Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Phyllis is captured by Kane, Jill's unsettling prophecy. Jill Abbott has a chilling prophecy, and Kane Ashby will threaten some consequences. When Jill entered the room, Diane Abbott and Jack Abbott were on the phone, griping about the Kane hit story from Newman Media and the consequences. After spending the entire week in town, Jill eventually made it for a visit, but she informed Jack that she wouldn't be staying for long. Although she is in good health, she needs to travel to London for a treatment. The two discussed Kane, which is currently everyone's favorite topic. Nevertheless, they started off by talking about Jason Thompson's character Billy Abbott, and Jill did regret that she attempted to patch things up with her son but he refused to listen. When she sold Chancellor to Victor Newman without telling Billy, Jack reminded her that it caused him great pain. Jill said she didn't regret what she did, but she did regret how she did it. They then discussed Kane and how disastrous the confrontation between him and Lily Winters was in the episode that aired on Thursday, October 9th, following the publication of that negative piece about Kane by Newman Media. Jack was concerned about retaliation, but Jill reassured him that Kane is more concerned with proving himself to his children than with exacting retribution on his adversaries. Jack made it apparent that the hit piece had nothing to do with him. When he inquired about the veracity of the Newman Media article, Jill was genuinely unsure. Jill stated that she would want to think that Kane was unaware of Colin Atkinson's scam when he inquired about it. According to Jill, during Colin's last days, he and Kane developed a strong bond. She went on to say that Kane was greatly inspired by Colin's transformation of his life and looked up to him. Jill foresaw that Kane would be completely destroyed if Colin had deceived that woman and his legacy was based on a falsehood. In the aftermath of their Kane piece, Chelsea Lawson and Adam Newman were having a good time at Newman Media. The clicks and traction were fantastic, but Kane quickly put a stop to it when he entered their headquarters. Kane threatened Newman Media with legal action, which was a significant threat. He asked whether the two had contacted any further sources. In addition, he indicated Chelsea would be releasing an article with a completely different conclusion and warned of a scoop he would offer them. Naturally, Chatham hurried to the Newman ranch to inform Victor Newman about Kane's threat of legal action and his brief remark regarding a new piece. Victor dismissed it as Kane strategizing and showed no care. Kane wasn't in his train cab when Phyllis Summers arrived. She started searching his bookcase, never one to pass up a chance to pry, and when Kane caught her, she said she was bored and searching for a deck of cards. Kane replied that he was running some errands when Phyllis asked him where he had been. When she pointed out that it was intriguing that he wasn't plotting retaliation, Kane said that it was for the Newmans, not for him. Phyllis questioned him directly about if the report was accurate and whether he was aware of Colin's scam the entire time. Kane's reaction differed from what he had stated to Jill the previous day. Kane only said, "Would that be a problem?" in response. They concluded the talk with Phyllis after she declined, reaffirming her commitment. Lastly, there are some heartwarming moments where Michael Baldwin and Lauren Fenmore are able to patch things up thanks to Christine Blair and Danny Romalotti. While Danny was asking Michael at the Jazz Lounge, Christine had called Lauren there. Lauren and Michael started arguing after all four of them arrived since Michael had lied about working for Kane while, in reality, he was a mole in Kane's organization for Victor. As fans are aware, Lauren was furious that Michael had lied to her and was fed up with his risking everything for Victor. Nevertheless, the pair was split up, with Christine talking to Michael and Lauren talking to Danny. In the end, the Baldwins kissed and made up after realizing how much they loved one another owing to their friends. The cherry on top was when Cricket chose Lauren to be her maid of honor and Danny asked Michael to officiate the couple's wedding. Phyllis Summers had never been one to shy away from danger, but even she had underestimated Kane Ashby's shifting temperament, his unpredictable intensity, and the depth of secrets Jill Abbott had warned about in her unsettling prophecy. Jill had entered the Abbott mansion with the gravitas of a woman carrying a message that no one wanted to hear, insisting that Kane was not just at a crossroads but already walking down a dark, treacherous path from which there might be no return. At first, Jack Abbott had dismissed Jill's warnings as her usual dramatics, another episode of her blowing canes passed out of proportion to protect the Chancellor legacy, but the way Jill's eyes narrowed and her tone chilled the room made it clear she wasn't simply pontificating, she was speaking from an instinct she could no longer ignore. Jill told Jack and Diane that she'd had a dream, half memory, half premonition, in which Kane stood at the center of Chancellor Park with the Chancellor name carved into stone, his hands covered in shadows, while Phyllis screamed in the background. At first, she laughed it off as the result of stress and too much transatlantic travel, but then the recent events, the Newman media hit piece, Kane's brazen threat of lawsuits, his cryptic insistence that he had his own scoop that would blow the Newmans apart, and now Phyllis poking into Kane's private quarters, made Jill feel like her dream was not just a dream, but a chilling prophecy taking shape in real time. Meanwhile, Kane, simmering with rage beneath his carefully polished exterior, felt more cornered than ever. He had tolerated Jill's judgment, Jack's condescension, and even Billy's disdain, but Newman Media's attack painted him as a conman's son and potential co-conspirator in Colin Atkinson's notorious scams, and Kane knew that if he didn't regain control of the narrative, his reputation, his relationship with his children, and even his financial footing would collapse. His confrontation with Chelsea and Adam at Newman Media had given him a small thrill, watching their smugness falter when he threatened legal ruin, but their sprint to Victor Newman revealed that Kane had rattled a hornet's nest, and if Victor chose to swat him down, no lawsuit in the world would protect him. That was why Phyllis's snooping became not just an annoyance but a dangerous provocation. She had caught him off guard in his private space, rifling through his belongings, searching for a deck of cards, she claimed, but Kane knew Phyllis too well to believe her excuses. Phyllis was a master manipulator herself, a woman who thrived on secrets and leverage, and when she pressed Kane about Colin's scam, whether he had known all along, whether his father's con was part of his own ascent, her persistence dug into his rawest nerve. His cryptic reply, "Would that be a problem?" was meant to unsettle her, but the flicker of amusement in Phyllis's eyes told him she had found a weak spot, and Kane knew at that moment that Phyllis would not let it go. What Kane didn't anticipate was just how far Phyllis would push, and how quickly she would transition from sparring partner to captive. Later that night, when Phyllis returned, emboldened by her suspicions, Kane was waiting, his demeanor no longer polished but raw and dangerous, and when she attempted to needle him again about Colin, Kane grabbed her wrist with an intensity that shocked her, dragging her further into the room and locking the door behind them. Phyllis, for once, realized she had miscalculated, she had poked the wrong bear, and now Kane's darker impulses were surfacing. "You want to know the truth?" Kane snarled, his voice low and taut. "You want to know if everything I built was a lie? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But if you keep pushing, you'll never get the chance to tell anyone." Phyllis tried to laugh it off, claiming he was bluffing, but when Kane shoved her into the chair, tying her wrists with a rope he pulled from his drawer, something he claimed he kept for emergencies, she realized Jill's prophecy might be coming true in horrifying fashion. At the same time, Jill, who had left town for London, couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest, calling Jack again in the middle of the night to repeat her warning, this time in sharper tones, "Something is about to happen, Jack. Kane's going to do something none of us can undo. And I think Phyllis is the key." Jack, unsettled by Jill's insistence, brushed it off publicly but privately began making calls, trying to track Kane's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Kane interrogated Phyllis, demanding to know what she had found while snooping in his cab, what she suspected, and whether she planned to sell him out to Newman Media. Phyllis, ever the survivor, tried to spin the situation, insisting that she was on his side, that she could help him frame the narrative, that she could even feed disinformation to Chelsea and Adam to protect him. But Kane wasn't buying it, not after Jill had accused him of being too trusting, not after years of being underestimated by the Abbotts and Newmans alike. "You think I don't know what you're doing, Phyllis? You've been pulling the same tricks since the day you arrived in this town. Seduction, manipulation, lies, it's always the same game with you. But I'm not your pawn," he spat, tightening the ropes around her wrists. Phyllis, struggling but defiant, shot back, "And you're not your father, Kane. Unless you want to be. Is that it? You want everyone to believe you're Colin Atkinson's son through and through? Because right now, that's exactly how you're acting." The words hit him like acid, and for a moment Kane looked like he might lash out physically, but instead he slammed his fist into the wall, inches from her face, his fury barely contained. Outside of this unfolding nightmare, other storylines provided a bittersweet counterpoint. Michael Baldwin and Lauren Fenmore, with Christine and Danny's help, managed to reconcile, their love reaffirmed and their future brightened by wedding plans, while Victor dismissed Kane as a nuisance beneath his notice. Yet even as life went on for others in Genoa City, the danger in Kane's cab grew more palpable. Jill's prophecy, whispered across continents, seemed to hang in the air. Kane would destroy himself, and he would take someone with him. Whether Phyllis would escape to tell her tale, or whether she would vanish as another casualty of Kane's unraveling, remained the terrifying question, one that would shape the next chapter of their tangled destinies. Phyllis had always thrived on walking the razor's edge of danger, but being tied to a chair in Kane Ashby's cab was not part of her plan. It was something far more terrifying, something even her cunning mind hadn't fully prepared for, and as the minutes ticked by, she began to realize that Kane wasn't simply venting his frustration, he was unraveling right in front of her. Jill's prophecy was echoing in Phyllis's mind now like a warning bell, those words about Kane destroying himself and dragging someone else down with him, and though Phyllis wanted to dismiss such talk as Jill's melodrama, the truth was undeniable. Kane's eyes were wild, his tone laced with both venom and despair, and his need to prove himself was reaching a fever pitch. Across town, Jack Abbott was pacing in his study, recalling Jill's desperate late-night call from London. The way she had said, "Phyllis is the key," haunted him, because Jack knew Jill's instincts were rarely wrong, and for some reason he could not shake the feeling that Phyllis had stumbled into Kane's mess in the worst possible way. Jack tried to reach Phyllis's phone, but it went straight to voicemail, and though he told himself she was probably busy scheming or sparring with someone as usual, a cold dread gnawed at him. Meanwhile, in the Newman Tower, Chelsea and Adam were still reveling in the fallout from their damning article on Kane, oblivious to the fact that they had stoked a fire they could no longer control, while Victor brushed aside their concerns with his usual dismissive wave, declaring Kane irrelevant, though his dismissal was precisely what made Kane even more dangerous, because being underestimated was the fuel for his spiral. Back in the cab, Kane circled Phyllis like a predator assessing prey, demanding again to know what she had found, what she had seen in the cabinet, what she was planning to do with her suspicions about Colin's scam, and Phyllis, bound but not broken, crafted her words carefully, knowing that any sign of weakness could give Kane the upper hand. She leaned into her survival instincts, reminding him that she too had been dismissed, underestimated, and painted as a villain, that she too knew what it was like to claw her way back from the abyss of scandal, and if Kane thought she was going to crumble now, he was sorely mistaken. "You don't scare me, Kane," she hissed, her eyes flashing with defiance even as the rope burned her wrists, "because I've stared down men worse than you and walked away with the upper hand. The question is, are you really going to become Colin Atkinson's son in every way that matters, or are you going to be your own man?" For a moment, Kane faltered, her words slicing into the vulnerable part of him that hated being compared to Colin, the conman father whose shadow he could never escape, and he barked that he was nothing like Colin even as his actions proved otherwise. Outside the cab, a storm was building, the rain beginning to lash against the windows, creating an atmosphere as charged as the tension between captor and captive, and as lightning illuminated Kane's face, Phyllis saw not just anger but pain, the haunted look of a man trapped by his own lies and choices. Jill's prophecy replayed again in her mind, hands covered in shadows, Phyllis screaming, and she wondered if fate had already written her role in this drama. But Phyllis Summers was not the type to surrender to fate. If Jill's prophecy was a script, then Phyllis intended to rewrite the ending. She began working on Kane psychologically, turning the conversation away from herself and back onto his children, reminding him that every reckless decision, every threat, every violent impulse was a step closer to losing them forever. "You think your kids will look up to you if you end up in prison for kidnapping?" she pressed, her voice steady despite the fear crawling under her skin. Kane snapped that she didn't know what she was talking about, but the flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed him, and Phyllis knew she had struck a nerve. Meanwhile, Jill, restless in her London hotel suite, decided she could not stay away. The pull of her prophecy, the gut-deep certainty that Kane was about to do something catastrophic, drove her to pack her bags and book the next flight back to Genoa City, muttering to herself that if she didn't get there in time, there would be blood on her hands. Jack, increasingly uneasy, reached out to Michael Baldwin, who was enjoying his reconciliation with Lauren but reluctantly agreed to dig into Kane's movements for Jack's sake, and Michael's instincts as a lawyer and fixer told him that something truly sinister was brewing. As the storm raged, Kane grew more agitated, pacing the cab, muttering about Newman Media, about Victor, about Jill, about how everyone thought they could write his story for him, and Phyllis, sensing the escalation, began subtly loosening the rope on her wrists, the friction against her skin unbearable but necessary if she wanted any chance of escape. She remembered every scrape, every con, every moment of desperation in her long, checkered history, and she promised herself she would not end here, tied up by a man spiraling into his father's shadow. Across town, Victor, though publicly dismissive, couldn't quite ignore the nagging feeling that Kane's threat of a scoop might not be empty, and he ordered one of his investigators to quietly monitor Kane, not realizing that the real danger was already unfolding behind locked doors. By the time Jill's flight landed and she rushed into Jack's arms, begging him to listen, Phyllis's wrists were raw but finally free, and she prepared herself for the moment Kane turned his back long enough for her to make a break for it. But Kane, perceptive despite his rage, caught the movement, lunging at her with a snarl that reminded Phyllis of just how far gone he was, and in the struggle, the chair toppled, the ropes came fully undone, and Phyllis managed to scramble to her feet. She ran for the door, but Kane was faster, slamming it shut, his body blocking the exit, and in that instant, Jill's prophecy seemed to hang in the room like a curse, Kane with hands covered in shadows, Phyllis screaming, destruction inevitable. Yet in true soap opera fashion, the scene did not end with blood but with a shocking cliffhanger. Kane, trembling and broken, whispered, "You don't understand, Phyllis. They'll all see. They'll all know the truth. And when they do, I'll finally be free." His words hinted at a revelation even darker than Colin's scam, a secret that could rock Genoa City to its core, and though Phyllis didn't yet know what he meant, she realized that her captivity was only the beginning of a much larger war, one Jill's prophecy had foreshadowed, one that would entangle the Abbotts, the Newmans, and perhaps even the Baldwins before it was over. Phyllis Summers had faced countless betrayals, schemes, and dangerous men, but there was something particularly chilling about the way Kane Ashby's voice cracked when he whispered, "They'll all know the truth," because for the first time, Phyllis saw that Kane wasn't simply posturing or bluffing, he was holding on to some secret so destructive, so consuming, that it had broken him from the inside out. The storm outside the cab roared louder, a perfect backdrop for the tempest unraveling inside, and as lightning lit Kane's tormented face, Phyllis understood that Jill Abbott's prophecy was not just symbolic but frighteningly literal. Kane's hands were already stained by shadows, his psyche drowning in darkness, and if Phyllis didn't find a way out soon, she might become the very scream Jill had dreamt of. Kane began pacing again, muttering names, Victor, Jill, Jack, Lily, Colin, as if he were arguing with ghosts only he could see, and Phyllis realized with horror that he wasn't just angry, he was fractured, his mind slipping further away with every moment of pressure. "Kane," she tried carefully, modulating her voice into a mixture of compassion and firmness, "you've got to tell me what this truth is. You're scaring me, and if you want me to understand, you've got to let me in." Kane whipped around, his eyes blazing, and snapped, "You? Understand? You've made a career out of destroying people, Phyllis. You thrive on secrets, so maybe you're the only one twisted enough to get it." He yanked open the cabinet Phyllis had been snooping in earlier, pulling out a thick folder stuffed with documents, photos, and clippings, slamming it onto the table before her. "You think Colin was the only one running scams? You think I didn't learn from the best? Every single one of them, Victor, Jill, Jack, they've all been hiding things, burying them. But me? I kept records. I kept the proof. And when I decide the time is right, I'll burn them all down." Phyllis's heart pounded as Kane shoved the folder toward her, daring her to look, but her instinct screamed that the moment she laid eyes on the contents, she'd be bound to whatever madness Kane was about to unleash. Still, curiosity was her poison and her survival tool, so she let her eyes dart to the top page, a photograph of Victor Newman, Jill Abbott, and an unfamiliar woman, marked with scrawled notes in Kane's handwriting. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a careful mix of intrigue and fear.